It was just past 9 a.m. on a gray autumn morning in downtown Chicago. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Horns blaring, pedestrians rushing, the scent of fresh bagels and gasoline mixing in the crisp air. But at the corner of West Madison and Dearborn, something was off. A woman, older and clearly distressed, stumbled into the crosswalk, nearly collapsing as she clutched her coat with trembling hands. Her name was Dorothy Ann Carlswell, 68 years old, and she looked like she was running from something far worse than the police. 3 officers surrounded her within seconds. Officer Travis Colbin, holding tight to the leash of his K-9 partner Havoc, gave the first verbal command. "Ma'am, show us your hands. Now." His voice was calm but firm. Dorothy didn't respond. Her eyes darted from one officer to the next, wide and haunted. Not defiant, but terrified. She seemed completely unaware of where she was, frozen in panic. Detective Marcus Kellan had just pulled up in an unmarked sedan. Stepping out with his coat still half-buttoned, he studied the scene from a distance. He'd seen a lot in 30 years on the force, breakdowns, guilty outbursts, drug-induced paranoia, but this felt different. Dorothy wasn't a threat. She was afraid of one, and she kept repeating something under her breath, voice shaking. "He found me. He finally found me." But the one who noticed first, before any of the trained officers could, was Havoc. The K-9's ears perked. His stance shifted. He stopped growling and started sniffing the air, not toward Dorothy, but toward the alley just behind the officers. A low, quiet whimper escaped his throat. Officer Colbin felt the leash tighten, not from aggression, but from alertness. Havoc wasn't reacting to Dorothy at all. He was reacting to something or someone else. Captain Raiden Holt arrived moments later, already frustrated. "What the hell's going on?" he barked, walking up fast. "This woman a suspect or a witness?" No one answered immediately. Their eyes were now on Havoc, whose body was facing the alley. The tension shifted like a wave. That was the moment everything began to unravel. What started as a routine street disturbance was about to expose a hidden chapter in Dorothy's life, one she had buried for over 30 years. And the only soul who sensed the truth had 4 legs. Dorothy Ann Carlswell hadn't left her apartment in nearly 3 weeks. The neighbors thought she was just a lonely widow, tucked away in her top-floor unit with dusty curtains and old jazz records. But inside, Dorothy was living with the constant fear that her past was clawing its way back into the present. She had changed her phone number 3 times in 1 year, burned letters, moved cities, and yet, that morning, she felt it in her bones. He was near. That's why she ran into the street. Not out of confusion, but survival. Detective Marcus Kellan sat at a desk inside the 14th precinct, watching the body cam footage from Officer Colbin. He replayed Dorothy's face in slow motion. Her eyes weren't the eyes of a criminal. They were the eyes of someone hiding a deep wound. He paused the video, staring at the frame where Havoc turned toward the alley. Something didn't add up. "Get me her file," he muttered to the officer on duty. "Everything, criminal history, mental health records, known associates." In another room, Captain Raiden Holt was less convinced. He flipped through the initial report with impatience. "This is a simple 10 to 96, he said, code for a mentally unstable individual. Get social services involved and move on. But something about Havoc's behavior bothered him. He had worked with dozens of K-9s over the years, and he knew when one sensed danger. "Still," he said to himself, closing the folder slowly, "dogs don't hallucinate." Back at the scene, Officer Travis Colbin knelt beside Havoc, gently brushing his fur while keeping his eyes on the alley. "You sure, buddy?" he whispered. Havoc let out a low, alert growl. Colbin stood up and motioned to another officer. "Sweep the alley," he ordered. What they found wasn't immediate danger, but it was a clue. A torn piece of a photograph, half buried under wet leaves. It showed a man's face, partially burned at the edges. And on the back, the faded handwriting read, "Dorothy, you promised." Kellan reviewed the photo later that evening. "Who did she promise?" he asked aloud, as if expecting the answer to drift through the room. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the case already pulling at his gut. Whatever Dorothy had been running from, it wasn't over. Not yet. And somewhere, just outside the station, Dorothy sat in silence, staring at the clock on the wall as if counting down to something only she understood. Dorothy sat on the edge of a metal bench inside the precinct's holding room, her hands shaking, her eyes fixed on the floor. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, washing the room in a cold, sterile glow. Her coat had been taken, but she clutched a worn handkerchief in her lap. Something old, something personal. Embroidered in faded thread were the initials RC. No one had asked about it yet, and she hadn't offered. Outside that room, however, a storm was forming, one that had waited decades to resurface. Detective Marcus Kellan leaned against the wall outside, arms crossed, watching her through the one-way glass. "She's hiding something," he muttered. "But it's not a crime." His instincts, sharpened by years of interrogation rooms and broken confessions, told him this woman wasn't dangerous. She was haunted. He flipped through her file again. No arrests, no psychiatric holds, no missing person reports filed under her name. But her history had a 10-year gap with no address, no employment, no trace. People didn't just vanish like that, unless they were running. Captain Raiden Holt wasn't sold. "We don't have time to chase ghosts, Kellan. If she's a witness, fine. If she's unstable, we call mental health. But don't turn this into some crusade." His voice was firm, dismissive. But even as he turned to walk away, Kellan noticed something. Holt glanced at the one-way glass twice. Something in Dorothy's presence unsettled even the captain, though he'd never admit it. Meanwhile, Officer Travis Colbin took Havoc for a quiet walk behind the precinct building. The dog had been restless since the alley. He kept sniffing at the wind, tail twitching, ears perked toward every passing sound. Colbin crouched down, resting a hand on Havoc's shoulder. "You still think there's something out there, huh?" The dog let out a soft whine and sat, his gaze fixed on the trees beyond the fence, as if waiting for someone to appear. Back inside, Dorothy finally spoke, softly, almost to herself. "His name was Richard Carlswell. My husband." Kellan froze as he heard the name through the intercom. The initials, the 10-year gap, the photograph. It all started to take shape. "He died," she whispered. "Or at least, that's what they told me." In that moment, a chill ran down Kellan's spine. Either this woman had completely lost touch with reality, or something far more sinister had been kept buried. And Havoc had sensed it first. Detective Marcus Kellan stood frozen for a moment outside the interrogation room. The name Dorothy had just spoken, Richard Carlswell, rattled something loose in the back of his memory. He returned to his desk and began digging through the old local archives. Richard Carlswell had been a prominent name in a missing persons case from 1989, declared legally dead in 1996. A quiet man, Vietnam veteran, schoolteacher. No body ever found. The case was closed with suspicion of suicide, but something about it always seemed unfinished. Inside the room, Dorothy's voice grew steadier. She spoke as if unburdening herself after years of silence. "They told me he jumped into the lake that night, after the call, but I never believed it. Richard wouldn't do that. Not without saying goodbye. Not without taking his father's watch. He loved that watch more than anything." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, tears welled in her eyes. Then the letters started coming. A year later, one every Christmas. No return address. Captain Raiden Holt was brought back into the room by Kellan, reluctantly. He listened in silence as Dorothy detailed how the letters described places they had once visited, details only Richard would know, and how each one ended with the same phrase, "Still watching the waves." Holt's face tensed. "Why didn't you report any of this?" he asked. Dorothy just stared at him. "Because I was told not to, by a man in uniform." Meanwhile, Officer Travis Colbin was reviewing the torn photograph found in the alley. Lab results had come back. The photo was authentic, dated to the early 90s. The ink on the back matched fountain pens common in that era. But more importantly, Forensics had enhanced the burned image. It was unmistakably Richard Carlswell, alive and recent. Havoc, sitting beside him, let out a quiet growl, ears forward, as if recognizing the man. As Kellan pressed further, Dorothy finally broke. Her voice trembled. "I was part of something. Richard, he got involved in something he shouldn't have. Military intel, private contracts, surveillance on civilians. He thought he was protecting the country. But when he tried to walk away, they said he had to disappear. I was next." She looked at Kellan. "You think I'm crazy, but they made me disappear too." Kellan didn't speak. Neither did Holt. Havoc stood at the doorway, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the far hallway, alert again. Somewhere deeper in the building, the emergency exit clicked open, and in that single sound, everything they thought was buried began to rise again. The emergency exit door had never made a sound like that before. It wasn't slammed, it wasn't rushed. It clicked open like someone who knew exactly where it was and how to use it. Detective Marcus Kellan rose from his chair instantly, his instincts firing on every cylinder. He looked at Officer Travis Colbin, who was already standing, hand gripping Havoc's leash tighter. Havoc was motionless, focused, tail stiff, ears pointing down the hallway like twin arrows. Captain Raiden Holt stepped out of the observation room and squinted down the corridor. "No one was scheduled to come through that door," he muttered. "Security check now." A uniformed officer jogged toward the rear of the building while Kellan, Holt, and Colbin moved toward the source of the sound. The corridor was dimly lit. Every footstep echoed. On the far wall, a camera had been turned slightly by hand. Someone knew where the blind spots were. Back in the interrogation room, Dorothy sat completely still. Her hands were clenched so tight, her knuckles had gone white. She looked at the one-way mirror and whispered, "He's here." Her voice was calm now. Not panicked, not paranoid, just certain. "I told you he'd find me." The officer returned seconds later, breathless. No sign of entry, no footage, but the lock was overridden. Someone used a coded keycard. Captain Holt's expression darkened. Only senior personnel had that level of access. Kellan turned to Colbin. "We need to move her. Now, quietly." But Havoc barked just once. A sharp, high-alert bark, and then bolted down the hallway, nearly dragging Colbin behind him. They followed Havoc to the stairwell. There, lying on the floor, was a manila envelope. No footprints, no one in sight. Colbin picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside were 5 photographs, all black and white. All surveillance shots. Dorothy over the years. Leaving a grocery store, sitting in a park, entering a church. Someone had been watching her for decades. And in the corner of each photo, printed faintly, were the initials, RC. Kellan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a memory. It wasn't paranoia. Dorothy had been tracked and protected by someone who was supposed to be dead. "He's not trying to kill her," Kellan said aloud. "He's trying to warn her, or protect her from something bigger." Just then, Havoc turned back toward the hallway and began growling, low and deep, because someone else was still inside the building. Officer Travis Colbin didn't loosen his grip on Havoc's leash as they moved back into the hallway. The dog's entire posture had changed, shoulders low, head forward, a quiet, guttural growl rising from his chest. Havoc wasn't reacting out of aggression. He was protecting. "He's tracking someone," Colbin muttered. Kellan gave a sharp nod. "Let him lead." They moved past the stairwell, turning toward the secured offices in the back of the precinct. These rooms weren't open to the public, and most officers didn't have clearance. Yet one door at the far end, Holt's private case storage room, was ajar. Captain Raiden Holt froze. "That room requires double authorization," he said. "Mine and the deputy's." He pulled his keycard from his belt and scanned it. It beeped red. Access denied. Someone had overridden the system. Kellan stepped forward and slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dark except for the dim light of a flickering monitor. Files had been pulled from drawers and scattered across the floor. Photos, reports, redacted pages. At the center of the mess was a single document, unfolded and placed on the desk like it had been meant to be found. It was a classified memorandum dated June 7, 1991. Subject: Project Sentinels. The name Richard Carlswell appeared 3 times on the first page. Captain Holt's face tightened. I thought that program was shut down in '92. Kellan looked over his shoulder. What program? Holt didn't answer, but Dorothy did. She had entered the room quietly, escorted by a junior officer who couldn't stop her insistence. Her voice echoed in the space. It wasn't a program, it was a network. Surveillance cells embedded in civilian life. Richard was recruited to spy on domestic threats. And when he found out they were targeting innocent people, he tried to expose them. That's when they erased him. Everyone stood in silence as she walked slowly to the desk and picked up the document. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady. This is why I ran. This is why he never came home. And this is why someone is still watching. Havoc suddenly barked, twice, sharply, and turned toward the back closet door. Colbin stepped forward, weapon drawn. He opened it fast, empty, but the small access panel on the floor was wide open. A maintenance tunnel. Someone had been inside the room and had just slipped away beneath their feet. And now it wasn't just about protecting Dorothy anymore. It was about exposing a hidden system, one that was never meant to see the light of day. The maintenance tunnel beneath the floor wasn't on any public blueprint. Captain Holt confirmed it had been sealed off years ago during renovations, or so he was told. Now, with the hatch flung open and fresh dust disturbed, it was clear someone had been using it. Officer Colbin knelt by the entrance with Havoc, who sniffed into the darkness and growled low. Tracks, Colbin muttered. Recent. Kellan looked at Holt. Who had access to this layout? Holt hesitated. Only senior command. Myself. Deputy Chief Lorman. Maybe 1 or 2 others. His voice was tight, like he was remembering something he didn't want to. That tunnel leads to the sublevel parking lot. No cameras, no guards. It was built during the Cold War as an escape route. Kellan stared at him. So if someone wanted to smuggle intel or a person in or out without a trace. Holt nodded grimly. That's how they do it. Back in the evidence room, Dorothy sat in silence as she sifted through old photographs and redacted files that had once belonged to her husband. Her hands trembled slightly as she uncovered a file labeled Carlswell, Richard, Asset Compromised. Attached to it was a small, sealed envelope. It hadn't been opened. She recognized the handwriting immediately, Richard's. On the front, a single line. If they find this before you do, destroy it. Kellan returned just as Dorothy was holding the envelope. Their eyes met. You should open it, he said gently. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated December 12, 1996. It outlined a list of names, operatives embedded in law enforcement, government agencies, even hospitals. All of them involved in monitoring so-called domestic dissent. At the bottom of the page was one name underlined twice. Lorman. Deputy Chief Lorman? Kellan whispered. Holt's face went pale. He was in charge of disbanding the Sentinel program. We trusted him. Kellan stood slowly, fury rising behind his calm eyes. He didn't shut it down. He inherited it. At that exact moment, a voice crackled over the precinct intercom, but it wasn't dispatch. It was pre-recorded, distorted. You were warned. Let sleeping ghosts lie. Then silence. Officers looked around, confused. The power flickered for a second. Havoc barked loudly, pacing in circles. The threat was no longer in the shadows. It was already inside. And for Dorothy, this wasn't just about the past anymore. Now, everyone in that building was a target. Chaos gripped the precinct. Phones were ringing without being touched. Security monitors glitched into static. And across every screen, a single phrase began to flash in red text. Protocol 17 engaged. No one knew what it meant, but Dorothy did. She stood up, heart pounding, her voice suddenly sharp. That's a kill switch. It's not just a warning. It's a purge order. Detective Marcus Kellan turned to Captain Holt. How do we shut this down? Holt was already at his desk. furiously typing in override codes that were being rejected one after the other. "This wasn't installed by us," he said, breath shallow. "It's a legacy system buried deep in the precinct's foundation. Someone's had access for decades." Officer Colbin scanned the ceiling. "If they've hijacked comms and power, they could also trigger fire suppression, door locks, maybe even weapon caches." Havoc barked once, pacing with agitation. Dorothy held the envelope from Richard tighter. "He always told me, if this day ever came to find the mirror room, he said it held the real records." Kellan looked at Holt, confused. "That mean anything to you?" Holt swallowed hard. "Basement level, behind the old archives. There's a mirrored wall that was installed for optics, but there's no practical use for it. We always thought it was decorative." Dorothy's expression turned hard. "It's not." They moved fast. Colbin led the way with Havoc, whose behavior was now laser-focused. He guided them through the lower corridors, past emergency storage, until they reached a narrow hall that ended in a tall, spotless mirror. Dorothy stepped forward, placed her hand on the glass, and to everyone's shock, it clicked open like a vault door. Inside was a narrow, concrete room lit by a single bulb. Filing cabinets, a metal desk, and one active terminal. Kellan approached the screen. It was already logged in to Richard Carlswell's credentials. "How?" he whispered. Dorothy was already scanning the cabinet drawers. Dozens of names, locations, and operation logs were inside. Project Sentinel hadn't ended, it had evolved. They had been tracking private citizens, whistleblowers, journalists, even retired military. And at the top of one list, Deputy Chief Lorman, marked as Controller. Suddenly, a voice echoed from a small speaker in the room. "Live this time." "I hoped you'd never find this place," the voice said. It was Lorman. "But now that you have, I can't let any of you leave." In that moment, every light in the precinct cut out at once, and the real purge had begun. The blackout wasn't total. Emergency lights flickered faintly in red, casting long shadows across the basement walls. The mirror room was now sealed shut behind them, locked by a magnetic system they couldn't override. For a brief moment, silence fell. Then Havoc let out a low growl, his body tense. Officer Travis Colbin knelt beside him, trying to calm him, but the dog's instincts were locked onto something. Someone approaching. "Everyone stay low," Kellan ordered, pulling Dorothy behind a filing cabinet. Captain Holt checked the terminal again. Still active, still logged in. "We can't stop the purge from here," he muttered, "but we can redirect it." His fingers danced over the keys. "If I can reroute the power from the emergency generators, I might be able to fry the central control node. Take down the protocol before it activates the building's full lockdown." Dorothy moved beside him. Richard always talked about redundancy. If Lorman is using this system to control law enforcement targets, there's got to be a second site, a failsafe. She rifled through one of the drawers and pulled out a thin folder marked Phase 2, Site B. Inside, handwritten coordinates. Kellan stared at them. "This isn't just about this building," he said. "There are others." At that moment, a metallic clang echoed through the walls, the unmistakable sound of a door being forced open upstairs. Havoc growled louder, more aggressive now. Colbin stood, gun drawn, his voice low. "They're inside. Whoever they are, they're not here to arrest us." Holt's eyes locked onto Kellan's. "We have two choices. Stay and try to destroy the system from here, or escape with the files and expose Lorman publicly. Either way, someone doesn't make it out." Kellan looked at Dorothy, who didn't hesitate. "I'll go," she said. "They want me. They'll follow me." Colbin shook his head. "No way. Havoc and I will draw them off. You three get out through the lower maintenance shaft. There's a ladder behind the boiler room. It leads to the old train tunnel." Holt gave him a long look, one of silent respect. "You sure?" Colbin nodded. "Someone has to give them a target." As footsteps echoed closer and the lights flickered again, everyone moved into position. Havoc was calm now, no fear, only focus. Dorothy gripped the folder to her chest. Kellan looked at her. "Once we're out, This goes straight to the media. Dorothy didn't blink. It goes to the world. And then they split. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and colder than expected. Every step echoed like a warning. Detective Marcus Kellan led the way with Captain Holt and Dorothy close behind. Dorothy clutched the folder against her chest like it was the last piece of her life worth saving. The documents inside weren't just evidence. They were truth decades in the making. As they moved, Holt kept glancing back, waiting for the sounds of pursuit. But nothing came, just silence, heavy and waiting. Back inside the precinct, Officer Colban crouched behind the far desk with Havoc at his side. Red laser dots danced across the hallway as masked men in tactical gear cleared the upper floors. But they didn't expect resistance. Colban waited, steady, until the first man breached the basement. One shot center mass. Havoc lunged the moment the second tried to flank them. It wasn't about winning. It was about buying time. Above ground, in the abandoned subway line, Kellan pried open the rusted gate and helped Dorothy through. She was shaking but steady. Captain Holt followed last, sealing the door behind them. "We're clear," Kellan said, voice low but urgent. Dorothy looked up, her breath misting in the air. A single ladder led to the street grate. She climbed first. When she pushed it open, sunlight hit her face for the first time in hours. Warm, brilliant, real. They emerged in an alley 4 blocks from the station. Kellan's contact, a former federal agent turned whistleblower, was already waiting with a black SUV. No words were needed. Dorothy handed over the folder. The man opened it, scanned a few pages, and nodded. "It's more than enough," he said. "Once this hits the networks, it's over. Lorman's not just going to lose his badge, he's going to lose his freedom." Dorothy turned back toward the direction of the precinct. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with release. "He tried to protect me all these years," she whispered. "Richard, he never stopped watching." Kellan stepped beside her. "He gave us the tools to finish what he started," Captain Holt added quietly, "and he reminded us what justice is supposed to look like." 3 days later, the story broke nationwide. Documents, recordings, footage, all verified. Project Sentinel was real, and so was the betrayal inside the system. Deputy Chief Lorman was arrested. Arrests followed across 4 states, but it wasn't the headlines that mattered most. It was the image of Dorothy, standing on her porch days later, as a police cruiser pulled up, and Havoc, tail wagging, leapt into her arms. For the first time in 30 years, she was truly safe.